Wait, you actually showed up in an Uber? Her voice sliced through the elegant Manhattan restaurant like a knife, loud enough to turn heads at neighboring tables. Raphael Chen sat across from her, hands folded calmly on the white tablecloth, watching as this woman, who he'd agreed to meet only because his colleague Maria had insisted he get back out there, looked at him like he'd just tracked mud across her designer shoes. At 34, Raphael never imagined a blind date would go south this fast. 5 minutes. That's all it took for Isabella to check his background on her phone under the table and decide he wasn't worth her time. An Uber, she repeated, shaking her head with a laugh that sounded more like a weapon than genuine amusement. I thought Maria said you were successful. Successful people don't arrive at the Sterling in rideshares. The Sterling was one of those places where appetizers cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, and every waiter moved with the precision of someone who knew exactly how much money sat at each table. Raphael had chosen a simple navy suit, well-tailored but understated. Nothing flashy. Nothing that screamed wealth. He'd learned a long time ago that real power doesn't need to announce itself. It's practical, he said evenly. Parking in this area is difficult, and I wasn't sure if I'd want to drive after dinner. Isabella's perfectly manicured eyebrows shot up. After dinner? Oh honey, there isn't going to be a dinner. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, studying him like a specimen under glass. Maria conveniently forgot to mention that you're an ex-convict. The word hung in the air between them, heavy and ugly. Raphael felt the familiar tightness in his chest, the same one he'd felt 3 years ago when the judge read his sentence for corporate fraud he didn't commit. When his own legal team, paid for by the company that framed him, barely mounted a defense. When he walked into that cell knowing he was innocent but having no way to prove it. But his face showed none of that. Just calm. Just patience. Ex-inmate, he corrected gently. And yes, I served 3 years for a crime I didn't commit. The charges were eventually dismissed when new evidence proved the CFO and 2 executives at my former company had orchestrated the entire fraud scheme. But I understand if that's... Oh please. Isabella waved her hand dismissively, her diamond bracelet catching the light. Everyone says they're innocent. Every criminal has some sob story about being framed. A waiter approached tentatively. Would you like to hear our... We won't be ordering, Isabella cut him off without looking at him. Her eyes stayed locked on Raphael. This was a mistake. Raphael glanced at the young waiter, probably early 20s, working his way through college if the calluses on his hands were any indication. The kid looked mortified to be witnessing this scene. Give us a moment, please, Raphael said kindly. The waiter nodded and retreated quickly. Isabella's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen, and Raphael caught a glimpse of the notification. Board meeting reminder, Montfort Tech, Monday 9 a.m. Something shifted in his expression, just for a microsecond, but Isabella was too busy typing a response to notice. Let me guess, she said without looking up. You're going to tell me you're turning your life around, or that you've learned from your mistakes. She made air quotes with her fingers, still not meeting his eyes. That you deserve a second chance? Raphael waited until she finished typing and finally looked at him again. Actually, he said quietly, I was going to say that I understand your concern. Trust is earned, not demanded. And someone with your background, with your family's legacy in technology and venture capital, has every reason to be cautious about who you spend time with. That made her pause. You know who I am. Montfort Tech. Your grandfather founded it in the 70s. Your father expanded into global markets. You took over as executive vice president 2 years ago. Raphael's voice remained neutral, almost conversational. Yes, I know who you are. Maria mentioned it. Isabella's expression shifted slightly, part suspicion, part intrigue. And you still agreed to this date? Knowing I'm... She trailed off, clearly fishing for him to finish the sentence with something flattering. Wealthy? Powerful? From a prominent family. Raphael leaned forward slightly. None of that matters if there's no respect. No kindness. No willingness to see someone as a person rather than their worst moment. Her face flushed red. Excuse me? Are you seriously lecturing me right now? You're the one with a criminal record, and somehow I'm the problem. I didn't say you were a problem. Raphael's tone stayed maddeningly calm. I said respect matters. There's a difference. Isabella grabbed her purse, a limited edition Hermes that probably cost more than most people's cars. She stood abruptly, chair scraping against the polished floor. This is ridiculous. I don't know what Maria was thinking, setting me up with. She gestured vaguely at him, searching for the right insult, with someone so beneath my social circle. Raphael stood as well, not out of courtesy, but because sitting while someone towers over you puts you at a psychological disadvantage. He'd learned that lesson the hard way. Beneath your circle, he repeated softly. That's an interesting way to view people. It's realistic, Isabella shot back. You probably live in some cramped apartment, working some mediocre job, trying to claw your way back to respectability. And you thought, what? That someone like me would overlook your past because Maria vouched for you. The nearby tables had gone completely silent now. Everyone was watching. Raphael pulled out his wallet, a simple leather bifold, nothing fancy, and placed $200 bills on the table. For the waiter's trouble, he said. And his team. They shouldn't have to witness this. Isabella stared at the money, then back at him. Where did you? I work in corporate compliance consulting, Raphael said, his voice still even. I help companies identify and prevent financial fraud. Turns out, spending 3 years dissecting the fraud case that put you in prison makes you somewhat of an expert on the subject. Something flickered across Isabella's face. Confusion, maybe. Or the first hint of doubt. But she recovered quickly, grabbing the bills and shoving them back at him. I don't need your charity money. And I certainly don't need some ex-con playing hero. She threw the bills at his chest. They fluttered to the floor. Raphael didn't bend to pick them up. He just watched her, that same unreadable calm in his dark eyes. Enjoy your evening, Isabella, he said quietly. I hope your week goes well. She laughed, a sharp, cruel sound. Oh, my week will be fantastic. Unlike yours, I'm sure. She turned to leave, then paused and looked back. Do yourself a favor. Stay in your lane. People like you don't belong in places like this. Raphael waited until she'd pushed through the restaurant doors before he bent down and retrieved the money. He placed it back on the table, along with 8 more $100 bills. The waiter appeared at his elbow, eyes wide. Sir, you don't have to. Split it with your team, Raphael said. And I apologize for the scene. It wasn't your fault, the young man said quietly. That woman was, well, unaware, Raphael finished. A small smile touched his lips, not smug, not bitter. Just knowing. Sometimes people don't realize the bridges they're burning until the smoke is already in the air. Outside, Raphael walked 3 blocks to where his car was parked, a midnight blue Porsche Taycan he deliberately left far from the restaurant. His assistant, Jennifer, was on a call when he slid into the driver's seat. She ended the call quickly. That bad. Worse than we anticipated. Raphael started the car, the electric engine humming to life silently. She's exactly as arrogant as the background check suggested. Maybe more. Jennifer pulled up her tablet, swiping through documents. The board confirmed this morning. Your firm starts the comprehensive audit Monday at 9 a.m. Full access to all financial records, acquisition documents, and executive communications for the past 3 years. Raphael pulled into traffic, his mind already shifting from the personal humiliation to the professional task ahead. She has no idea who I am, he said quietly. Or what I do. Or that her company's board of directors just hired my firm to investigate irregularities in their recent acquisitions. The acquisitions she personally approved and defended to shareholders, Jennifer added. Raphael nodded. 3 years ago, he'd been destroyed by people who believed their wealth and status put them above accountability. People who saw others as disposable, as beneath them. He'd spent every day of those 3 years studying, planning, rebuilding himself into someone who couldn't be dismissed or destroyed so easily. If Isabella Montfort had bothered to ask what kind of compliance consulting Raphael did, she might have learned that his firm specialized in forensic financial analysis for Fortune 500 companies. She might have discovered that his client list included 3 of the top 10 tech companies in the world. She might have realized that the man she just humiliated in public was about to walk into her company's headquarters Monday morning with legal authority to examine every questionable decision she'd made as executive vice president, and that those decisions, based on the preliminary reports, were very questionable indeed. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden power, don't forget to subscribe to see what happens when Isabella finally discovers the truth. By Saturday morning, Isabella had already turned their disastrous date into content. Her Instagram story featured a photo of champagne at brunch with her friends, caption reading, "When you dodge a bullet before the appetizers even arrive, face with tears of joy, #standards exist, #know your worth." The post had 47,000 views in 3 hours. Raphael saw it because Maria called him, mortified. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea she'd do this. She's messaging our mutual friends about you, twisting everything to make herself look like the victim." He was in his home office, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, reviewing preliminary financial documents Jennifer had secured through proper legal channels. Montfort Tech's acquisition patterns over the past 18 months showed irregularities that made his forensic accountant instincts flare like warning sirens. "It's fine," Raphael said, though his jaw tightened slightly. "People reveal who they are when they think there are no consequences." "It's not fine. She's telling people you lied about your background, that you're some kind of con artist trying to infiltrate her social circle." Maria's voice cracked with frustration. "I vouched for you, and now she's making me look like an idiot for setting this up." Raphael closed the financial report on his screen. "Numbers could wait. Maria, listen to me. You didn't do anything wrong. Isabella's behavior says everything about her character and nothing about yours. Or mine." But after he hung up, Raphael stood at his window for a long moment, watching the Saturday afternoon traffic below. The humiliation shouldn't bother him. He'd survived far worse than a rich woman's Instagram mockery. Yet something about Isabella's casual cruelty, her absolute certainty that she could judge and discard people without consequence, touched an old wound. 3 years and 2 months ago, Raphael had sat in a courtroom while his former boss testified that Raphael had orchestrated a $12 million fraud scheme. The man had looked him dead in the eye and lied with the confidence of someone who knew the system protected people like him. People with money, connections, and the right last name. Raphael had been the company's internal auditor, the person who discovered the fraud. He'd reported it through proper channels, documented everything meticulously, and believed naively that the truth would matter. Instead, they'd made him the scapegoat. Fabricated evidence, deleted his protective documentation, and painted him as a disgruntled employee stealing from the company he was supposed to protect. His public defender had been overworked and underpaid, and Raphael's family couldn't afford the kind of legal representation that fights back effectively. The prison years had been brutal in ways he never talked about. Not because of violence, though that existed, but because of the psychological weight of being innocent in a place designed for the guilty. Every day felt like drowning in a system that didn't care about truth, only about closing cases and moving forward. His phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number with a screenshot attached, Isabella's private group chat, leaked by someone who apparently disagreed with her behavior. "Isabella, the ex-con actually thought he had a chance with me. Can you imagine? Friend 1, wait, he's really been to prison? Isabella, 3 years for fraud. Probably stole from his company. These people always have excuses. Friend 2, and Maria set this up? What was she thinking? Isabella, honestly, I'm questioning her judgment now. Like, read the room, Maria. We don't mix with criminals." Raphael's hands clenched around his phone. Not from anger at Isabella, he'd expected this from her. But seeing it written out, shared with her circle, using his worst moment as entertainment, it transported him back to that prison visiting room where his mother had cried, asking what they'd done to her son who'd always followed the rules. Jennifer appeared in his office doorway. "The board's preliminary meeting notes just came through from our contact. You need to see this." She handed him her tablet. The Montfort Tech Board of Directors had commissioned Raphael's firm, Chen and Associates Forensic Consulting, after anonymous tips suggested financial irregularities in their recent acquisitions. The board didn't know the connection between their new lead investigator and the executive VP's disastrous date. But what Jennifer was showing him now made his blood run cold in a completely different way. 3 shell companies, Jennifer said, pointing to the network diagram on screen. All connected to the acquisitions Isabella personally championed. The purchase prices were inflated by an average of 30%, with the excess funneled through these entities. Raphael scrolled through the evidence. Who owns the shell companies? Still tracing the ownership structure, but look at the timing. Jennifer swiped to a timeline. Every inflated acquisition happened within 2 weeks of Isabella receiving performance bonuses tied to company growth metrics. It was the exact same pattern that had destroyed Raphael 3 years ago. Executives inflating numbers to trigger their own bonuses, using complex corporate structures to hide the theft. The only difference was that Raphael had discovered and reported the fraud at his company. Here, Isabella appeared to be the one committing it. How much are we talking about? Raphael asked quietly. Conservative estimate? $18 million siphoned from shareholder value over 2 years. Raphael sat back in his chair, processing. On Monday, he'd walk into Montfort Tech with legal authority to examine everything. Isabella would be required to provide access to her communications, her approval documents, her financial records. She would have no idea who he was until the moment he introduced himself in that boardroom. His phone buzzed again, another screenshot from that same unknown number. This time it was worse. Isabella, I'm honestly thinking about reporting him to the police. Who knows what he's really up to? Ex-cons don't just turn their lives around. They're always working some angle. Friend 1, can you do that? Like, report him for what? Isabella, for lying his way into places he doesn't belong. For probably violating parole or something. I'll have my father's lawyers look into it. Friend 2, ISA, maybe that's a bit much? It was just a bad date. Isabella, no, people like him need to learn their place. He needs to understand there are consequences for trying to infiltrate our circles. Raphael felt something shift inside him. Not rage. He'd learned long ago that rage made you sloppy. But a cold, crystalline certainty that Isabella Montfort represented everything wrong with a system that protected the powerful and crushed the vulnerable. She wanted to use her family's lawyers to put him in his place. She wanted to weaponize her privilege against someone she perceived as defenseless. She was exactly like the executives who'd framed him, who'd believed their money and status made them untouchable. But Isabella had made 3 critical errors. First, she'd assumed Raphael was powerless because of his past. Second, she'd underestimated his intelligence and professional capabilities. And third, most crucially, she'd committed genuine fraud while believing no one would ever look closely at her actions because of her last name. Jennifer was watching him carefully. What do you want to do? Raphael looked at the evidence on the tablet, then at his phone showing Isabella's threats, then back out of the city where somewhere right now, she was probably posting more mockery about the ex-convict who dared to share her air. We do our job, he said quietly. Thoroughly, legally, and by the book. We document every irregularity, follow every thread, and compile evidence that would stand up in any court. Not because of what she did to me, but because shareholders deserve the truth about where their money is going. And if the evidence leads exactly where it appears to be leading? Raphael met Jennifer's eyes. Then Isabella Montfort will learn what real consequences feel like. Not from vindictiveness. From justice. What Isabella couldn't know while she sipped champagne with friends and plotted ways to use her family's power to hurt someone she considered beneath her, was that the man she was threatening had spent 3 years in prison studying every aspect of corporate fraud law, had built his entire post-incarceration career around exposing exactly the kind of schemes she'd apparently been running, and was about to gain authorized access to every digital communication and financial transaction she'd made as an executive of her family's company. The hunter had just marked herself as prey, and Monday morning was coming faster than she could possibly imagine. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that New York sometimes gifts its inhabitants. Raphael stood outside Montfort Tech's glass and steel headquarters at 8:47 a.m., watching employees stream through the revolving doors. Jennifer stood beside him, leather portfolio in hand. Legal confirmed full access to all systems as of 9 o'clock. The board's given us executive-level clearance to every database, email server, and financial record. And Isabella? Required to attend the initial briefing and provide complete cooperation. Jennifer's expression was carefully neutral. She still doesn't know it's you. Raphael adjusted his tie, charcoal gray, conservative, the uniform of someone who dealt in facts rather than feelings. Then let's not keep her waiting. The 42nd floor conference room was designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, and the mahogany table could seat 20 comfortably. 6 board members were already present when Raphael and his team entered, along with Montfort Tech's chief financial officer and general counsel. Isabella walked in 30 seconds later, mid-conversation on her phone, clearly annoyed at being summoned. She wore a designer pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail that emphasized her sharp cheekbones. "I don't care what the projections say, Marcus. Tell them we're moving forward with the..." She looked up, and her entire body went rigid. Raphael stood at the head of the table, laptop open, projector already displaying the Chen and Associates logo. The phone slipped from Isabella's hand, clattering on the polished floor. Every head in the room turned toward her. Ms. Montfort, the board chairman, Richard Brennan, said with concern, "Are you all right?" Isabella's face had gone through 3 shades of pale in as many seconds. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. No sound came out. Raphael met her eyes with that same unreadable calm from Friday night. "Good morning, Ms. Montfort. I'm Raphael Chun, lead forensic consultant with Chen and Associates. We'll be conducting a comprehensive audit of Montfort Tech's acquisition activities over the past 3 years. Your full cooperation has been authorized by the board." Isabella's voice cracked. She cleared her throat, trying to recover her composure. "You can't be serious." "I assure you we're quite serious," Richard said, looking between them with confusion. "Ms. Montfort, do you know Mr. Chen?" The room had gone completely silent. Raphael could see Isabella's mind racing, trying to figure out how to handle this without revealing their prior encounter, without admitting she'd spent Friday night mocking him on social media. "We've met," Isabella managed, her voice tight. "Briefly. I wasn't aware of his profession." "Mr. Chen's firm specializes in forensic financial analysis," the general counsel explained. "They've worked with some of the largest tech companies in the country. Their credentials are impeccable." Isabella's eyes narrowed dangerously. Raphael could practically see her shifting strategies, moving from shock to counterattack. "I'm sure they are. Though I have to question the ethics of someone with a criminal record conducting sensitive corporate investigations." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard leaned forward. "Excuse me." "Mr. Chun is an ex-convict," Isabella said, recovering some of her confidence now. "He served 3 years for corporate fraud. I hardly think that makes him qualified to audit our company's finances. In fact, I think it's a massive conflict of interest." Raphael had expected this. Had known from the moment he accepted this assignment that Isabella would use his past as a weapon if she ever discovered who he was. He remained perfectly still, his expression unchanged. Jennifer, however, spoke up. "Ms. Montfort, Mr. Chun was wrongfully convicted and later exonerated when evidence proved he'd been framed by executives at his former company. The charges were dismissed, his record expunged, and he received a formal apology from the state. All of this information is publicly available and was thoroughly reviewed by your board before our firm was hired." Richard's expression had gone cold. "Ms. Montfort, I'm aware of Mr. Chen's history. Unlike you apparently, I actually read his firm's background file. The fact that he identified corporate fraud at his own company, reported it, and was then scapegoated for it actually makes him uniquely qualified for this work. His experience gives him insight that conventional auditors don't have." Isabella's face flushed red. "With all due respect, Richard, I don't think." "The board has made its decision," Richard cut her off. "Mr. Chen and his team have full authority to conduct this audit. Your cooperation isn't optional, Isabella. It's mandatory." Raphael finally spoke, his voice calm and professional. "Ms. Montfort, I understand your concerns. If you'd like to request a different lead investigator, the board can consider that. However, it may delay the audit by several weeks while a replacement is briefed." It was a calculated offer. Delay meant more time for evidence to be hidden or destroyed. Isabella knew it, and Raphael knew she knew it. "That won't be necessary," Isabella said through clenched teeth. "I have nothing to hide. Let's get this over with." Over the next 4 hours, Raphael and his team conducted preliminary interviews and established their investigative framework. Isabella sat through it all, arms crossed, radiating hostility. Every answer she gave was technically cooperative, but laced with contempt. When they broke for lunch, Isabella cornered Raphael in the hallway outside the conference room. Jennifer tactfully stepped away, though she stayed within sight. "You planned this," Isabella hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You knew who I was at that restaurant. You knew about this audit. This whole thing is some kind of revenge scheme because I rejected you." Raphael turned to face her fully. "Ms. Montfort, I accepted the blind date on Friday. This audit was commissioned by your board 2 weeks ago. Unless you believe I have the power to manipulate corporate boards into hiring my firm based on potential future dating disappointments, the timeline doesn't support your theory." "Don't play games with me," she snapped. "I know what you're doing. You're trying to destroy my reputation because I saw through your act." "My act," Raphael repeated quietly. "You mean the act where I told you the truth about my past, my work, and my wrongful conviction? That act." Isabella's eyes flashed with rage. "You think you're so clever, don't you? Coming in here with your team and your authority. But I know people, Raphael. Important people. My family built this company. One phone call and I can have your firm's contract terminated." "You could try," Raphael acknowledged. "But the board hired us specifically because they suspect financial irregularities in acquisitions you personally approved. Firing the auditors would only confirm those suspicions. Your family may have built this company, but shareholders own it now. And they care about their investments, not family legacies." For a moment, something like fear flickered across Isabella's face. Then she stepped closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "I will bury you," she said. "You think you know what power looks like because you spent a few years in prison and came out with a consulting business? I have access to resources you can't even imagine. Lawyers, investigators, media contacts. By the time I'm done, no one will hire your firm to audit a lemonade stand." Raphael held her gaze, and when he spoke, his voice carried a weight that made Isabella instinctively take a step back. 3 years ago, executives who thought exactly like you destroyed my life. They believed their power made them untouchable. They used the system to crush someone who threatened their schemes. They assumed I'd be forgotten, discarded, irrelevant." He paused, letting that sink in. "They were wrong. And if you've actually committed the fraud our preliminary investigation suggests, you'll discover exactly how wrong they were." He walked away before she could respond, leaving Isabella standing in the hallway, shaking with rage and something that might have been the first seeds of genuine fear. That evening, Jennifer spread documents across Raphael's office desk. The evidence was mounting faster than either of them had anticipated. "She's panicking," Jennifer said. "We flagged suspicious transactions for review, and within 2 hours, she tried to access the backup servers. IT caught her attempting to download archived emails from the relevant time periods." Raphael looked up sharply. "She's trying to destroy evidence? Or review it to prepare her defense? Either way, she knows we're onto something." Jennifer pulled up a network diagram on her tablet. "And look at this, we traced the shell company ownership. It goes through 3 layers of corporate structures, but the ultimate beneficiary is a trust." "Let me guess," Raphael said. "Isabella's trust?" "Her brother's, actually. Marcus Montfort. He's listed as a silent investor in the companies being acquired. Every inflated purchase price funnels money through entities he partially owns. Isabella approves the acquisitions, the prices are inflated, and her brother's holdings increase in value." Raphael sat back, processing. Family fraud. They're stealing from their own company's shareholders to enrich themselves personally. And Isabella's bonus structure means she benefits directly from the appearance of company growth, even if that growth is artificially inflated. Jennifer shook her head. "It's textbook fraud. The kind that gets executives prison sentences." The irony wasn't lost on Raphael. He'd gone to prison for fraud he didn't commit. Isabella had committed actual fraud and was about to face consequences she never imagined possible. His phone buzzed, another message from that unknown number that had been leaking Isabella's group chats. This time, the screenshot showed a conversation from earlier that day. "Isabella, emergency. That auditor from the blind date is the one investigating us. He knows everything." "Marcus, how much does he actually know?" Isabella, too much. We need to shut this down. Father's lawyers, media pressure, whatever it takes. Marcus, can you access the evidence before he presents to the board? Isabella, I tried. IT blocked me. We might need to consider more aggressive options. Unknown friend, ISA, what does aggressive options mean? You're scaring me. Isabella, it means ex-convicts are easy to discredit. Especially when they're making accusations against established families. Raphael forwarded the screenshots to Richard Brennan with a simple message, you should see this. What Isabella didn't realize, couldn't comprehend through her panic and rage, was that every attempt to obstruct the investigation, every threat, every move to destroy evidence only strengthened the case against her. Raphael had spent 3 years learning exactly how corporate fraud investigations work, how evidence chains are established, how digital footprints are tracked. He knew that the cover-up often became more damning than the original crime. And as Isabella scrambled to protect herself using the same tactics that had once destroyed him, she was meticulously documenting her own guilt in ways that no lawyer could explain away. The hunter had become the hunted, and she still didn't understand that the trap had already closed. The emergency board meeting was called for Thursday afternoon. Raphael had requested it after discovering what he called significant irregularities requiring immediate board attention. Isabella arrived 15 minutes late, her usual power move. But this time, her confidence looked forced. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, evidence of sleepless nights since Monday's revelation. The conference room was packed. All 9 board members, the CFO, general counsel, and the company's external legal team. Isabella's father, Thomas Montfort, sat at the far end of the table, his expression unreadable. He'd built this company from nothing, and everyone in the room knew how fiercely he protected the family legacy. Let's begin, Richard Brennan said. Mr. Chun, you have the floor. Raphael stood, connecting his laptop to the main display. Thank you. Over the past 4 days, my team has conducted a comprehensive analysis of Montfort Tech's acquisition activities from January 2023 to present. What we discovered constitutes systematic corporate fraud totaling approximately $18.3 million. The room erupted in shocked murmurs. Isabella's face went pale, but she recovered quickly. That's absurd, she said loudly. This is clearly a vendetta. I already told the board about Mr. Chen's criminal past and his personal grudge against me. Ms. Montfort, Richard said sharply. You'll have an opportunity to respond. Let Mr. Chun present his findings. Raphael clicked to the first slide, a network diagram showing 3 shell companies. These entities, Riverside Holdings, Apex Ventures, and Summit Capital, were involved in 6 acquisitions that Montfort Tech completed over the past 2 years. In each case, the purchase price was inflated by 25 to 40% above fair market value. He clicked again. Financial records filled the screen, highlighted sections showing the money trail. The inflated portions were funneled through these shell companies, which are owned through a complex trust structure. The ultimate beneficiary of that trust is Marcus Montfort, Ms. Isabella Montfort's brother. Thomas Montfort's head snapped toward his daughter. Isabella. He's lying. Isabella stood abruptly, her chair scraping back. This is fabricated evidence. He's framing me just like, she stopped, realizing what she was about to say. Just like what happened to me. Raphael finished calmly. The difference, Ms. Montfort, is that I have documentation for every claim I'm making. Would you like to see the email where you authorized the inflated purchase price for TechFlow Systems? He clicked to the next slide. An email chain appeared, Isabella's name highlighted as the sender. From i.montfort@montfortech.com to m.montfort@summitcapital.com subject. TechFlow acquisition revised pricing. Marcus, board approved the original $8 million valuation, but I'm pushing for $11 million. The extra $3 million flows to Summit as consulting fees. Your cut is 40% as agreed. Make sure the invoice looks legitimate. The silence in the room was deafening. Isabella's mouth opened and closed. That's taken out of context. There are 47 similar emails, Raphael continued. Each documenting coordination between you and your brother to inflate acquisition prices. Additionally, You received performance bonuses totaling $2.1 million based on company growth metrics that these fraudulent acquisitions artificially inflated. He clicked through slide after slide. Bank records. Wire transfers. Internal memos where Isabella had pressured the valuation team to increase their assessments. Text messages between her and Marcus discussing how to structure the deals to avoid detection. Thomas Montfort's face had gone from pale to red. You stole from our shareholders? From our company? From your own family? I didn't steal anything. Isabella's voice cracked. She turned desperately to the board members. You're going to believe an ex-convict over me? Over a Montfort? He showed up at a restaurant, tried to infiltrate my personal life, and now he's manufacturing evidence to destroy our family. Raphael remained perfectly still. Ms. Montfort, I have the IT log showing you attempted to access and delete archived emails on Monday evening after our initial meeting. I have the forensic recovery of those deleted messages, which only further confirm the fraud. And I have testimony from 3 employees in your division who were pressured to approve inflated valuations against their professional judgment. Jennifer stepped forward, handing folders to each board member. These contain the complete evidence package, including chain of custody documentation, third-party verification of all financial claims, and legal analysis confirming that these actions constitute securities fraud, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. Isabella looked around the table wildly, seeing only cold stares and disgust. Her eyes landed on her father. Dad, please. You can't actually believe. I read the emails, Isabella. Thomas's voice was quiet, broken. I saw your signature on documents authorizing payments to companies your brother owned. Companies I never knew existed. The general counsel spoke up. Mr. Chun, in your professional opinion, what exposure does the company face? Civil liability from shareholders, potential SEC investigation, and criminal charges for the individuals involved in the fraud, Raphael answered. However, the company can mitigate damage by self-reporting to regulators, returning the stolen funds, and cooperating fully with authorities. The primary criminal liability falls on those who orchestrated the scheme. Isabella sank back into her chair, her entire body trembling. The reality was finally breaking through her denial. I can explain. Marcus said it was legal. He said everyone did this kind of thing. You're an executive of a publicly traded company, Richard said coldly. You have a legal obligation to shareholders. You violated that obligation repeatedly and systematically for personal gain. The board needs to vote on immediate actions, the general counsel said. I recommend suspension pending criminal investigation, with immediate revocation of all system access and company privileges. I second that motion, another board member said quickly. Thomas Montfort stood slowly. He looked at his daughter, really looked at her, and what Isabella saw in his eyes made her flinch. Disappointment so profound it was almost physical. You had everything, he said quietly. Every advantage, every opportunity. And you threw it away for greed. Worse, you dragged your brother into it. You've destroyed our family's reputation. All in favor of immediate suspension? Richard called. 9 hands rose simultaneously. The motion carries. Ms. Montfort, effective immediately, you are suspended without pay. You will surrender your building access, company devices, and all proprietary materials. Security will escort you from the premises. Isabella looked at Raphael, and for the first time, tears streamed down her face. Not tears of remorse, tears of rage and humiliation. You did this, she whispered. You destroyed me. Raphael met her eyes with that same calm he'd shown at the restaurant. No, Ms. Montfort. You destroyed yourself. I simply documented what you'd already done. The fraud, the theft, the attempt to cover it up, those were your choices. I just made sure there were consequences. Security appeared at the door. Isabella stood on shaking legs, her designer outfit suddenly looking like a costume. As she walked past Raphael, she stopped. I was right about you, she said, voice filled with venom. You don't belong in our world. You're correct, Raphael replied quietly. I don't belong in a world where people believe their wealth exempts them from basic decency and legal accountability. I prefer the world where actions have consequences and justice applies equally. As security escorted her out, Isabella's phone buzzed repeatedly. Her social media, her friends, the news outlets that had somehow already gotten wind of the story. The same digital platforms she'd used to mock and humiliate Raphael were now broadcasting her downfall. Thomas approached Raphael after the room had cleared. "Mr. Chun, I owe you an apology. Not just for my daughter's behavior, but for the system that created someone who could act with such entitlement." "You built a good company, Mr. Montfort," Raphael said. "What your daughter did doesn't define that legacy. How you respond to it will." As Raphael left Montfort Tech headquarters that evening, news vans were already gathering outside. The story was breaking across financial media. Prominent tech executives suspended amid fraud allegations, criminal investigation pending. Isabella's Instagram, where she'd posted mockery of the ex-convict just days ago, was now flooded with comments demanding accountability. Her privileged friends were deleting their supportive messages and distancing themselves as quickly as their phones would allow. And somewhere in the city, prosecutors were reviewing the evidence Raphael's team had compiled, preparing charges that could send Isabella to the same type of prison where Raphael had spent 3 years for crimes he didn't commit. The symmetry was almost poetic, except this time, the person being held accountable was actually guilty. 6 months later, Raphael stood in front of a packed auditorium at Columbia Business School, where he'd been invited to speak about corporate fraud detection and ethical business practices. The irony wasn't lost on him. 3.5 years ago, he'd been sitting in a prison cell, branded a criminal by a system that hadn't bothered to look deeper. Now he was teaching future business leaders how to prevent the exact kind of fraud that had destroyed his life, and how to hold perpetrators accountable when it happened. "The most dangerous fraudsters aren't the obvious criminals," Raphael told the students. "They're the ones who believe their position protects them from consequences. The executives who think their family name or wealth makes them untouchable. And the system often proves them right, until someone refuses to look away." His consulting firm had tripled in size since the Montfort Tech case. Companies now sought him out specifically because of his unique background, someone who understood fraud from both sides, who'd survived being falsely accused and who knew how to prove when accusations were legitimate. Jennifer had been promoted to partner. Maria, the colleague who'd set up that disastrous blind date, had apologized so many times that Raphael finally had to tell her to stop. "You gave me an opportunity to prove something important," he told her. "That the truth matters more than power." The Montfort Tech scandal had dominated financial news for months. Isabella had been arrested 3 weeks after Raphael's presentation to the board. The evidence was overwhelming: those 47 emails, the bank records, the testimony from employees she'd pressured to falsify valuations. Her brother Marcus had been arrested the same day. The trial had been swift. Isabella's expensive legal team tried every tactic, discrediting Raphael's testimony by bringing up his criminal record, claiming the evidence was circumstantially manipulated, arguing that her actions were standard industry practice. Nothing worked. The jury had deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. The judge had been particularly harsh during sentencing, noting that Isabella had betrayed not only shareholders but the public trust, using her position of privilege to steal while showing callous disregard for those she considered beneath her. Isabella Montfort was sentenced to 7 years in federal prison. Her brother received 6. Both were ordered to repay the stolen funds plus penalties, a sum that had required selling off most of their personal assets. Raphael had attended the sentencing, not out of vindictiveness, but because he needed to see it with his own eyes, that the system could work, that accountability could reach even the privileged and powerful. When Isabella was led out in handcuffs, she'd looked at him one final time. The arrogance was gone. The contempt was gone. What remained was the hollow-eyed awareness that she'd destroyed everything for greed and pride. Raphael felt no satisfaction in her suffering, just a quiet sense that balance had been restored. Thomas Montfort had stepped down as chairman, though he'd stayed on as an advisor to help rebuild the company's reputation. He'd reached out to Raphael privately, months after the trial. "My daughter made choices I'll never understand," Thomas had said over coffee. "She had every advantage, every opportunity to build something meaningful. Instead, she chose shortcuts and cruelty. I failed her as a father by not teaching her that wealth is a responsibility, not a shield." Raphael had appreciated the honesty. She made her own choices. "You're not responsible for those." Perhaps. but I'm responsible for creating an environment where she believed those choices were acceptable. Thomas had paused, then added, I've established a scholarship fund for formerly incarcerated individuals pursuing business degrees. Named it after you, if that's all right. Raphael had been stunned. Mr. Montfort, that's not necessary. It's necessary for me, Thomas had insisted. You turned suffering into purpose. You could have become bitter, vengeful. Instead, you built something that helps people. That's the lesson I wish I'd taught my children. Now, finishing his lecture at Columbia, Raphael opened the floor to questions. A young woman in the third row raised her hand. Mr. Chun, when you were in prison, knowing you were innocent, did you ever want revenge against the people who put you there? Raphael considered the question carefully. Every day. But I realized that revenge is just pain trying to replicate itself. Justice is different. Justice is about restoring balance, about ensuring actions have appropriate consequences. When I started my firm, my goal wasn't to hurt the people who'd hurt me. It was to prevent what happened to me from happening to others, and to ensure that when fraud does occur, the guilty parties face real accountability. Another student asked, what about Isabella Montfort specifically? You must have felt some satisfaction seeing her convicted. Satisfaction? No. Raphael shook his head. What I felt was vindication, not for me personally, but for the principle that no one is above the law. Isabella didn't go to prison because of our bad date or because she humiliated me. She went to prison because she committed serious crimes and the evidence proved it beyond reasonable doubt. That's how the system is supposed to work. After the lecture, Raphael checked his phone. A message from an unknown number, but he recognized the prison facility code in the sender ID. You were right. Power without accountability is just tyranny. I had to lose everything to understand that. I am. Raphael stared at the message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. Isabella's journey toward understanding her mistakes was her own to make. He'd moved forward, and nothing she could say now would change the path either of them had walked. That evening, Raphael met Jennifer for dinner at a small restaurant in Brooklyn. Nothing like the Sterling's pretentious elegance, just good food and honest atmosphere. Did you see the news? Jennifer asked, sliding her phone across the table. 3 more companies have requested our firm for fraud investigations, all citing the Montfort case as their reason for wanting us specifically. Raphael scanned the email. Major corporations, the kind that usually hired the big established firms. We'll need to expand again. Hire more analysts, maybe open a second office. From ex-convict to CEO of one of the most respected forensic consulting firms in the country, Jennifer said with a smile. That's quite a journey. Ex-inmate, Raphael corrected gently, the way he always did. And the journey isn't over. Every case we take, every fraud we expose, every innocent person we help vindicate, that's the work that matters. Not the title or the success. But he couldn't deny that the success felt meaningful. Not because of the money or prestige, but because it represented something larger. Proof that a person could be broken by injustice and still rebuild. That past mistakes, or past accusations, didn't define your future unless you let them. His phone buzzed again. Maria, sending a photo of her engagement ring with a message, found someone who appreciates my matchmaking skills, finally failed spectacularly, lol. But seriously, thank you for not holding that disaster against me. Raphael smiled and typed back, that disaster led to justice being served and my business growing exponentially. I should be thanking you. Congratulations on the engagement. Walking home later, Raphael passed the Sterling restaurant where his date with Isabella had imploded so catastrophically. He paused outside, looking at his reflection in the glass, no longer the man who'd nervously arrived for a blind date, hoping for connection. Now someone who understood that his worth wasn't determined by who accepted him at their table, but by how he conducted himself when tested. Isabella had tried to put him in his place, believing that place was beneath her. What she'd never understood was that Raphael had already found his place, not in social hierarchies or wealth brackets, but in the work of seeking truth and demanding accountability. 7 years ago, Raphael Chun had walked into a prison as an innocent man destroyed by corporate fraud. He'd emerged 3 years later with something more valuable than vengeance, a purpose. He'd turned his suffering into expertise, his humiliation into motivation, and his wrongful conviction into a career exposing actual criminals. Isabella Montfort had mocked him for arriving at their date in an Uber, for having a criminal record, for being someone who didn't belong in her world. She'd used every weapon of privilege and prejudice to demean him, never suspecting that the man she was crushing had already survived far worse and emerged stronger. In the end, she'd gone to prison for crimes she actually committed, while he built an empire on integrity and justice. The best revenge, Raphael had learned, wasn't destroying your enemies. It was succeeding so completely that their attempts to diminish you became footnotes in your story of triumph. If this story moved you, if you believe in second chances and real accountability, subscribe to our channel for more stories about justice, redemption, and the power of refusing to let others define your worth.